Hey guys, it's Pika here, bringing you a part 2 to our 9.0.5 guide video for Protection Warriors in Shadowlands. The topics that we're going to cover today are things like the heavy Repercussions versus anger management debate, the Into the Fray versus Ravager debate, rotations for any of the talent choices that you seem to choose, stat weights that I prefer to use in Mythic Plus, the enchants that are favorable for Protection Warrior in Mythic Plus, and finally the Shadow Core Oil versus Sharpening Stone. Alright, let's jump right into it. Hey guys, first off I want to preface this video with a couple of things. The information and the topics covered in this video are 100% my own opinion, with some empirical evidence backing it all up. On some topics, there is no completely right answer. Tanking is a very unique beast. It's not like DPS where they just try to maximize their DPS. Things like playstyle, group comp, key level, and routing all play a major factor on the choices that you make for your character. The information is what I have found best for me, my playstyle, and my group. Secondly, both Skyhold Discord and I have come to the agreement that simming for Prot Warrior is just very inaccurate right now. Raidbots and SimC both do not currently work with the Reprisal Legendary at all, and any dungeon sim is way off just because it doesn't account for anything such as the downtime into between packs or proper CD management. For example, it may use Ravager at the last 5-10% of a single target mob, instead of holding it the 5 or 10 seconds for the next pack, that way maybe it's like a 10-20 mob pack. So therefore it is impossible for sims to be perfectly accurate. Other than that, let's jump right into it. One of the biggest questions going around right now is how good is heavy Repercussions versus anger management? I know we covered this a little bit in our previous guide videos, but things were a little bit uncertain back then when you're talking to heavy Repercussions, where we find it's kind of found its niche right now in the Mythic Plus community, because one of the best Prot Warriors are actually using heavy Repercussions now in their constant build. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. So first off, what heavy Repercussions does is generates more rage every time you use slam, and the big important part is that it extends the duration of shield block by 1 second every time you shield slam, as opposed to anger management, which is every 10 rage you spend reduces the mini cooldown of Avatar and shield wall by 1 second. So just like from a broad range perspective, heavy Repercussions looks pretty good right here, right? Because shield block uptime is something that makes Prot Warrior very strong against physical damage. Whereas something like shield wall it's one of our big major cooldowns that helps us deal with things like bleed and magic damage. So what heavy Repercussions allows you to do is essentially have 100% uptime of your shield block throughout a dungeon whenever you're fighting a pack, so effective shield block uptime. And whenever you're running anger management, your shield block uptime goes around between 70-75% depending on how optimally you are playing. But for effective shield block uptime, it's probably very close to 85-90% shield block uptime whenever you're fighting a pack, because usually in Mythic Plus you have things like trees like force of nature from Boomkins, or like Cardboard Assassin, or you can just straight up like kite away, right? But heavy Repercussions allows you to have a lot less kiting uptime in Mythic Plus, and kind of gets you that that feeling of you never really have to run away, right? Which is what tanks are brooding for, what they're wishing for in the current Mythic Plus meta of Shadowlands. So when it comes to what is better, right? And actually as Prot Warriors, we're actually pretty blessed here, because there is no perfectly right answer. What I have found personally in Mythic Plus is that heavy Repercussions is very good in some dungeons, whereas in other dungeons, I really want to run anger management. And why is this? So heavy Repercussions actually loses a ton to almost all its value whenever you have to kite, right? Because you can't shield slam mobs, therefore you're not shield blocking, and when you're kiting, you don't really need to be shield blocking, right? Because the only things that are hitting you is typically ranged attacks or like magic damage, for instance, or you're getting destroyed by dots or bleeds, right? So this is true for dungeons like Halls of Atonement, right? The bleeds from the Gargans, or Plaguefall, whenever you're dealing with the Borers, or even like the other side, right? Because like in the Hakar hallway, everything is bleeding you up, or in Ardenweld, you're going to be pulling so big that outside of cooldowns, like shield block alone won't be able to keep you up, right? You just need something when you're pulling like 40 mobs like a bear in the other side. But where dungeons like Spires, Necrotic Wake, Sanguine Depths, TOP, Heavy Repercussion is actually a really good choice. And why is this, right? Some of the reasons behind this is that some of the bosses hit really hard or are tank buster bosses. Things like Gorge Hom, right? Every time it uses this huge slam attack on you, you want to have shield block up. If you don't, you're going to get trucked. If you have shield block up, you're actually going to feel really okay, right? The mob hit is only going to do like 20-25% of your health, as opposed to doing like 75% of your health outside of shield block. Something like the Last Loss and Necrotic Wake, every single time it does the Icy Shard Blast at you, which is every single attack, is all blockable, right? So Heavy Repercussions gains a ton of value the more shield block uptime you can have versus something like Anger Management. So that's why I'm finding it really dungeon dependent right now. Whereas, again, like HOA, PF, Plaguefall, the other side, AM, 100% my go-to talents. Whereas in HR, I'm finding it, pretty good to play Inspires, Necrotic Wake, Sanguine Depths, and TOP. When talking about Miss personally, I know people have seen on my stream that I personally like to use Seismic Reverberation Legendary because there's no like major tank buster mobs, and it gives you something like anywhere from like 300 to 500 more DPS by running Seismic Reverberation plus AM over something like Heavy Repercussions, because you can just destroy the packs with Revenge. Personally, yeah, again, I think it is completely up to your own playstyle. Heavy Repercussions, if you don't have the kite, can do a ton of damage single target. It's about the same damage as Anger Management in single target, but as you go into more and more AoE, and if you ever have the kite, AM slowly gets somewhere like 100, 200 more DPS than Heavy Repercussions overall. Next up, we're going to talk about Into the Fray. So Into the Fray, I did a little bit of testing with this. We went to 2 different Miss 15 dungeons, and I wanted to really dig down and see, what is the difference between Into the Fray and Ravager from an empirical standpoint. So what we found is this. So in the Miss 15, when I was in Miss, basically I had a 94.6% uptime of shield block. This is just general shield block that I use from details, not from logs. So this isn't true effective uptime of shield block. So things when you're going through packs or you're kiting at all, this isn't 100% uptime of shield block. But typically, when you're using these two talents with Heavy Repercussions, I get about 94.6% uptime of shield block with Into the Fray, where I got something about 82.80% shield block with Ravager. So if you're talking about effective uptime, it's probably around 10%, 5% more than what it's showing. So Into the Fray, 100% uptime. Ravager, probably 85 to 90% effective shield block uptime. This is the other thing that we're talking about a lot, right? So Into the Fray is more potential for you to lose aggro than Ravager. Why is this, right? Because Ravager is all upfront damage. So for a whole 11.1 seconds, you generate 10 rage each time it deals damage, right? So whenever you're going into a big pack, you throw Ravager from range. For that first 11 seconds, you basically have infinite rage in comparison to Into the Fray. Into the Fray gives you a lot of haste while you're inside the fight, so it'll give you a ton of rage, more GCDs during the pack, but your initial aggro will be a lot less. Because when you start the pack, you can actually spam Revenge, Shield Block, and Ignore Pain for 11 seconds as much as you can without really running into any rage issues. Whereas ITF, you need to keep weaving Shield Slam, Thunderclap in order to have enough rage to Revenge. So whenever I did this dungeon, I had about 6 times where I lost aggro, just completely to a Red Paladin, Fire Mage, or a Fury Warrior, which is the comp we were running. Whereas with Ravager, I only kind of lost it twice, right? And this basically ended up being about 195k overall melee hits taken to the group, as opposed to 80k melee hits taken to the group, right? Whichever melee or range DPS was taking that. The overall rage gain was about 8.5 and 9.0. The overall damage I was looking at was about 4.8k overall damage with Into the Fray, and about 5.2k overall for using Ravager. So right there, I saw about 300 DPS increase by using Ravager. The rage gain, you got about 8.5k with Into the Fray, where Shield Slam was a dominant factor of why I had so much rage during that key. Whereas with the Ravager talent, most of my rage actually came from Ravager, and a little bit most of it was Shield Slam, but about half of it was also Ravager. And this is the big thing right here, right? You can see that for the dungeon duration, it was about the same time we finished the 15 key. But Revenge cast for Ravager was about 307, and Into the Fray was about 302. This is actually very similar, right? About how many casts. But the big thing is how many times I had to cast the other abilities. This basically made it I had to cast Shield Slam 51 more times in the dungeon, and Thunderclap I had to cast 34 times more in the dungeon. But I can cast the same amount of Revenges in that time. Right, so Into the Fray has a lot more like high speed gameplay. It's like really that like a very fast pace. You know, you're spamming your cooldowns like one after the other. Every GCD you're spamming something. Whereas Ravager is a little bit more of like a thought process into that 11 seconds. You can pump as much DPS as you can, and then after that you can kite. You can stay in the pack, do whatever it takes. But what it provides mostly is that big aggro at the start of any pull. Whenever a Fire Mage is combusting, a Fury Warrior is using its big Blade Storm, Ret Pally is using Wings, right? It makes it so that you are a lot more comfortable in the pack as opposed to ITF. But, ITF makes sure that you have 100% uptime of Shield Block whenever you're fighting the packs, as opposed to Ravager. Maybe you have like very small windows. Overall, though, the major difference that you want to take away from this is that Ravager does do more damage overall. This is what I find throughout all of my keys. Of course, this is only a 1-to-1 ratio, like between two different keys, whereas the sample size isn't gigantic. But this is the overall trend I've been finding. So in this case, I would always say, you should go with Ravager instead of ITF. I kind of always make the joke that ITF is the lazy man's Ravager, which is kind of true, right? You don't need to be running Into the Fray. Ravager does do more damage, especially as pack sizes grow larger. When you're talking about pure single target, Into the Fray actually does a little bit more single target than Ravager. But in an AoE situation, Ravager actually takes off, right? In Myth Plus scenarios. The last thing I want to say is that Into the Fray is a very good talent. Right, it's one of our best talents for when we were doing any raid content. It makes you really reminiscent of that BFA, very spammy prot warrior. You're essentially Into the Fray, right? You're like spamming GCDs every second, and it feels very good, right? But Ravager really helps you with the start initial threat of any pull, because you have it every 45 seconds, which essentially Mythic Plus means you have it every pull, right? Because big pulls and high Mythic Plus keys take about 30 to 45 seconds per pull. So at that first 11 seconds, you have enough rage to shield block, to ignore pain, and spam revenge without ever having to worry about threat from your entire group. As opposed to Into the Fray, where if you're not running with a rogue or a hunter, it's really hard to get that initial aggro on a pack, or your DPS have to be really patient whenever they start DPSing. So although both talents are really good options, I would still choose Ravager in every regard, just because of the initial threat, the good damage it brings to the key, and it gives you that that time and that strength at the start of any pull in order to feel secure. And you don't also have to worry about if you're going to play with a rogue or play with a hunter. All right, let's jump right into what's next. All right, before we jump into the rotations, all the rotations next are going to be with the assumption that you are using the Reprisal Legendary for Shadowlands Season 1 Mythic Plus. Also, with you using the Reprisal Legendary, you're also intervening on cooldown in order to get the shield block and the revenge procs from that. All right, guys, let's next talk about rotations. So whether you're running Anger Management in Ravager, Heavy Repercussions in Ravager, or Heavy Repercussions and Into the Fray, your rotation is going to change a little bit along with your normal rotation. So first off, the opening rotation, if you're going into AoE pack with Anger Management in Ravager. First off, what you're going to do is throw Ravager from range. You're then going to charge plus Avatar, also using one of your shield block charges. Then you're going to be Thunderclapping, and the reason why you Thunderclap next instead of Revenging is that you want to use Thunderclap because Thunderclap hits everything around you at 360, right? So if you charge it and you charge right past the first mob in the pack, Thunderclap will still grab aggro for things that are behind you, as opposed to Revenge, right? Because Revenge only hits everything in a cone in the frontal. So Thunderclap just guarantees that you're gonna hit every mob in the pack to get aggro initially. Second, then you want to go into Revenge spamming as much as you can, and then provided you are shield blocking at the same time, keeping your shield block up and using Ignore Pain as much as needed, right? You don't want to overuse Ignore Pain, you just want to use it just the right amount if the pack even calls for it, but you want to be revenge spamming whenever you're in your 11.1 second window of Ravager. After that, you proceed to your normal rotation. Typically, for pure damage, you want to be doing Revenge is more important than Shield Slam, more important than Thunderclap. But outside of Ravager, you can be a little bit of Rage Starve depending on how much damage you're taking. Therefore, you want maybe Shield Slam goes up in a little bit of priority depending on how much Rage you need. Next, for single target, you want to use Ravager for Rage. Charge in Avatar Shield Block again. You want to instead then use Shield Slam and then Revenge Slam and Shield Block as much as needed. Ignore Pain as much as needed. Then you go through your normal rotation in single target. Shield Slam is precedent over Revenge over Thunderclap. You can Thunderclap more than Revenge if you need the Rage for if you're taking big damage, but this is your typical rotation process. Next, with heavy Repercussions and Ravager, same thing. You're throwing Ravager for Mage, Charge, Avatar, Shield Block, Thunderclap, Revenge Slam. Here, you want to prioritize Shield Slam a little bit more, whenever it's off CD. This is because by Shield Slamming, you're going to be increasing your duration of your Shield Block, which is the whole point of heavy Repercussions. So you want to Shield Slam on CD, but Revenge spam as much as you can just for aggro. And then in your normal rotation, Shield Slam precedent over Revenge over Thunderclap. Single target, Ravager, everything's pretty much the same as AoE. There's nothing really changing. Next would be heavy Repercussions and Into the Fray. In this case, you're not going to have that Ravager from range, so you need to charge in Avatar, Shield Block, Thunderclap, and you really want to prioritize Revenge spamming here. And yes, you are still Shield Slamming on CD, but you really want to make sure you're Revenge spamming to get that initial threat, right? Because in this build, you're going to have problems at the start of any pull if people are just taking off. So you need to Revenge, because the Revenge does more AoE damage than Thunderclap. So yeah, the Revenge more than Thunderclap in this, but high priority on Shield Slam whenever Shield Block is up to extend that. And that's also true in single target, right? Okay, let's go see what's next. Alright guys, let's talk next about stat weights. I know we covered stat weights in our previous guide video, but what I want to add is that right now in High Mythic Plus keys at the 24-25 level, I'm feeling pretty good at any time I have my haste above 20%, 20% being the bare minimum. Anything lower than that, you really start to feel that rage starvation, where you can't shield block, you can't ignore pain. What it helps you, but anything above 20% is that you have a good smooth rotation, having shield block, good shield block uptime, have shield slam and TC, thunderclap whenever you need it. And it just generally feels really good in High Mythic Plus. Anything lower than that, not so great. And the rest of it, you're just going to dump into the verse. Mastery and crit are good side stats, but they don't really contribute to your overall survivalness too much. Anything that's not going into haste, you should really be dumping into versatility. The only reason I have any crit or any haste at all is whether it's the stat choices on the item that I couldn't choose, or because the high eye level gear, right? Things like the pants that come off of Mythic SLG, or the Mythic Sire ring that has a lot of mastery, and this one also has mastery. That's where most of my mastery is actually coming from. But yeah, you want to be shooting for, at minimum, 20% haste in my experience, and the rest of it dumping into verse for survivability. Alright, next up, let's talk about Enchants. So let's start with Cloak here. Cloak, I personally like the 20 stam and 30 leech Cloak enchant as opposed to the 20 stam and 30 avoidance. Those are your only two options for Mythic Plus tanking. The reason why I like leech over avoidance, currently I'm finding that my leech is giving me about 30% of my overall healing, which is, depending on the dungeon, something around 250k plus overall healing in the dungeon, as opposed to avoidance, which only seems to help you only helps you in AoE damage situations. But I can see an argument for it currently in season 1 of Shadowlands, because prides, whenever the pride damage is ticking, which is one of Prot Warrior weakness, avoidance does help you take reduced damage on those abilities. But overall, I think leech or avoidance are good choices, but leech has the edge for me. Next is the chest piece. You have Eternal Stats versus Eternal Skirmish. Eternal Stats is actually better in AoE, but Eternal Skirmish is better than single target. I tend to favor Eternal Skirmish. There's not like too much of a difference, but Eternal Skirmish does more single target, so it's really good for, or better for bosses, better for prides, is which as a prot warrior where I'm finding I need to do more damage in, because you don't really suffer in AoE, right? Your DPS really handle that. It really comes down to like the single target damage on how fast can you kill pride so your DPS can hold cooldowns, or how fast can you kill bosses. These are like the big hard points of the dungeon, not really too much of the trash. For the other one is Lightless Force versus Celestial Guidance. This one is also, it's kind of like one of those debatable, right? Like Celestial Guidance is the same single target damage as Lightless Force, but there's some defensive benefit to it because it gives you strength, right? And strength gives you overall parry chance, like increases your parry chance by whatever percent. So getting that 5% increase in strength does help you a little bit defensively. But Lightless Force does more AoE damage than Celestial Guidance. So whenever I'm going into a pack, if I want good AoE threat and Lightless Force procs off right off the bat, then it basically means that, like, you know, I have good initial threat aggro on the entire pack. So I personally prefer Lightless Force. And then the rest of your other enchants, whether it be haste, verse, it just depends again on the stat weights that we talked before. Minimum 20% haste, everything else goes into verse. So in this case, if I was doing a push key, all of this would probably go into versatility for myself. Alright guys, the next thing I want to talk about is Shadow Core Oil versus Sharpening Stones. So the DPS difference between these two things is not huge, right? You can see here for single target, it's only about a 19 DPS difference for using Shadow Core Oil versus Sharpening Stone. But whenever you're talking about AoE, it's about a 50 DPS difference between this is Shadow Core Oil here, and this is for Sharpening Stone. But why I prefer to use Shadow Core Oil for myself is that the hardest point in dungeons, like I spoke about before, is prides and bosses right now in Shadowlands Season 1. And because I typically use Phantom Fire Potion whenever I'm fighting a pride, so my DPS can not have to use major cooldowns, or they can save their potion for the next big AoE pack or the next boss with pride buff. Typically as a tank, that's going to be your responsibility, right? So I want to do the most optimal single target damage, whether it be a boss or whether it be Pridefuls right now in Mythic Plus. So that's why I choose to use Shadow Core Oil. Obviously, this differs from character to character, so you should sim your own character for single target and AoE to find out what works best for you. But in most cases, I believe Prot Warriors should be using Shadow Core Oil for Mythic Plus. Alright guys, that is it for our Part 2 Shadowlands 9.0.5 Protection Warrior Guide. Thank you guys again so much for your support. You can catch me on Twitch at www.twitch.tv/PLKATV. And I hope to see you guys next time. Let me know if I missed anything in the comments below. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.